My guests tonight are the Collins brothers, Paul and Phillip Collins. How are you doing tonight?
Pretty good, sir. Doing well, just trying to stay warm.
Yeah, you are the authors of The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship and Examination of Epistemic Autocracy from the 19th century to the 21st century. You also write a bunch of articles for conspiracyarchive.com, correct?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's true.
And, tonight, one of your articles, Blackmailed by the Bomb, Nuclear Anxiety and the Cult of the Superweapon. That article, it starts off with the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, and an article by Seymour Hersh implicating Dick Cheney and JSOC in her assassination. Do you want to get into that and how it involved nuclear proliferation, a lot of intrigue, and perhaps the twisted vision of the deviant elite who run the world?
Yes, most people haven't really entertained the idea, but it's possible. There is an informal cult in the world that venerates the idea, the concept of a super weapon as the vehicle for ushering in a new world order, as the thing that's going to bring about permanent peace and bring about a world without wars. And right, when we say the cult, and by the way, the cult of the superweapon is actually a phrase that was invoked by H. Bruce Franklin in his book War Stars. That's not a neologism to which we can lay claim. But when we use the term cult in this discussion, it's not being used to denote some monolithic, coherent organization, but instead it's being used to denote a faddish obsession. And the faddish obsession is with the notion of the superweapon, which has found artistic expression in the literature of science fiction. It assumes various forms in science fiction. It ranges from everything from aerial supremacy through the use of high atmospheric aircraft
Dirigibles,
to of course finally the atom bomb, which was a term coined by none other than H.G. Wells in The World Set Free. But in all cases, whatever form this superweapon, whatever form it assumes, that superweapon is imbued with eschatological significance. And when I say it has eschatological significance, I mean that the weapon actually is viewed as the catalyst for the immobilization of history in a state of utopian permanence. It puts an end to the flux of history and ushers in what many globalists have called a new world order, essentially the homogenization of all nation states into a single transnational state, global state.
But most people do not consider the existence of this cult, mainly because it's not a formal cult with a membership roster and some kind of determinate point of origin, any kind of organizational structure. They don't consider its existence, and as a result, they don't consider its involvement in many different watershed moments throughout history, many what we would consider to be deep events too. Deep events are events that have a surface level to them and then a sub rosa level to them, where just like 9/11, for instance, where the surface level is 19 hijackers taking charge over these planes and ramming them into buildings that are symbolic of American capitalism. And below the surface, however, we see all these other deep state players, financial and intelligence figures and whatnot, moving, using the event to bring about a trade-off between freedom for security and a whole lot of other things. But we see this cult of the super weapon moving throughout a lot of watershed events, and one of those watershed events and one of those deep events is the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, and we examined in our article another article that was written by a very respected American journalist in May of 2009, Seymour Hersh. He wrote in that article that Pakistan's former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto had been the target of this death squad that had been started by Dick Cheney, the former U.S. president. The squad was headed up by General Stanley McChrystal, and McChrystal had just at that time been appointed the commander of U.S. military forces in Afghanistan. And Cheney was basically using his position as the chief of the Joint Special Operation Command, very, very spooky, very, very spooky part of the military-industrial complex. What has been referred to as a murder incorporated by those in the know and people that have come out of it. He used this to basically kill any opposition to the CIA and to basically American foreign policy plans over in that region of the world. And again, Benazir Bhutto was a target of this, according to Hersh. Now, Hersh, he hypothesizes as to why Benazir Bhutto became a target, and he comes to the conclusion that she might have been assassinated by this particular group under Cheney's watch, because she had expressed an opinion concerning the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden. She claimed that while the GWAT was still in full swing and still looking for this man, that the man was long since dead and had been killed by Omar Saeed Sheikh. And in our article, however, and we don't totally rule out that possibility, because there is in fact a body of evidence that suggests that bin Laden was dead and gone before the later narrative emerged, claiming that he had been found in Pakistan and killed by special forces and whatnot,
and then dumped into the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, without the benefit of any kind of autopsy or anything. It was all very strange.
Osama sleeps with the fishes.
Yeah, exactly. And all, but I and that did serve the foreign policy interest of certain deep state players here in the United States, and it certainly helped the Obama administration in particular at a time when when he was floundering and his administration was being seen in a very poor light and everything. But we wanted to suggest that there might have been an even deeper reason for this hit on Bhutto, and we think we in the article we assert that reason emerged during several radio interviews that were done after the December that were during radio interviews that were done shortly after the December 27th, 2007 assassination, and at that time Al Qaeda was the main culprit that was being considered as the main culprit and everything for the assassination, but what we found also was that Bhutto, when as she was trying to reach political power again in Pakistan, because her family had a long running history of political power over in Pakistan, and she was basically trying to regain that political power. Um, during her campaign to come rise to power again in Pakistan, Bhutto had promised to allow inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the United Nations entity, to come in and to actually question Abdul Qadir Khan. And Khan is a metallurgist and a nuclear black marketeer who is considered to be the father of the Islamic bomb. He is the one that gave Pakistan the bomb. And the fact that she was going to allow the IAEA to come in and question this man and speak to him really troubled certain deep state players here in the West, because of what his revelations would have shown, what the revelations would have shown in terms of collaboration with elements of Western intelligence, with deviant elites here in the West. It had them insanely alarmed, and this included people that could be considered adherents to that cult that we were describing at the beginning of the interview, that cult of a super weapon.
Basically, her remarks threatened to open a whole can of worms.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, because the Khan network, it's like a lot of different groups out there. Different criminal infrastructures, different terrorist organizations. It was played off as something that was acting free of the power system, acting free of the power structure, that had gone off basically in a rogue trajectory. But when you look closer at the facts surrounding the Khan network, you find out that it was a product of an alliance between deviant elites here in America and the Saudi royals, the elites in Saudi Arabia, and this alliance, this coalition between those two forces, was a group known as the Safari Club. Now, I know that you've spoken about them before in the past, in particular with E. Michael Jones. He brought them up during his conversation with you over the rise of the neoconservatives and all. But they were very significant movers and shakers in the world, mainly because this alliance, this coalition, allowed for Saudi Arabia to replace Israel as the CIA's chief source of intelligence in the Middle Eastern region. And it also allowed for the Saudi Arabians to basically begin financing Western intelligence. It was this group. It was this group that would give rise to the Khan network by basically creating the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and it's a long tangled trail, and we basically can go in any direction that you want in fleshing that out.
Well, first thing, when I mentioned in your article, you make a very important point, is that the Benazir Bhutto assassination was originally pinned on Al Qaeda,
right?
And you make the point that while Al Qaeda may have been involved in it at some level, it doesn't mean that there wasn't any involvement of JSOC or CIA or US, because Al Qaeda itself could be construed as being an asset or of Western intelligence, just like ISIS. Yeah.
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, yeah. You go back to the earlier the early years, Osama bin Laden's early years, he was under he was an aide to a guy by the name of Ekmatyar Galbuddin Ekmatyar, Galbuddin Ekmatyar had set up 6 opium labs in Afghanistan with CIA assistance. Mm-hmm. And everything. So I mean, like, you've always had the CIA or some intelligence coterie acting there in the backdrop. I mean, so it doesn't necessarily, just because this group or that group is the one that actually carries out the terrorist act or carries out the assassination, doesn't mean that we can dismiss the possibility of other deep state players, because there are these symbiotic relationships that exist there and continue to exist to the present day. Whether you're talking about the CIA's involvement with Al Qaeda or certain varieties of Al Qaeda, because it's become a very nebulous term with several different incarnations, or if you're talking about Western intelligence involvement with ISIS and its precursors like the Free Syrian Army. There's always, we see the murderous cutthroats carrying out most of the atrocities, and we're tempted to place the onerous of the blame on them as a result. But if we don't consider these symbiotic relationships that have been in existence with certain groups and entities within Western intelligence, then we really don't have a context for understanding those actions and how those actions might serve the interest of deep state players and not just the interest of the terrorist or the criminal organizations themselves.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, they are indeed proxy forces.
Yeah, that's what. You hit the nail right on the head. If you see these groups more as intermediates, as cutouts, as proxies, that's a more appropriate way of looking at them, and it puts their activities in a better context and everything, because otherwise it would seem nonsensical. Or I mean, it's just like with ISIS. I mean, they seem to have this large cachet of wealth coming in, and it's like, good God, where did they get these Toyotas? And like, Fox News will say something like, well, they hit this bank in Mosul, and so there you go. They did it. They had a tremendous bank robbery. Well, fractional reserve banking, which is like it's practiced the world over, dictates that only a fraction of actual physical holdings are going to be at that bank, and the rest have been loaned out.
Or stolen.
Yeah, or interest. They've given out interest-bearing loans, so the majority of the money is the majority of the physical holdings, the physical wealth, are not in the bank at the time, anyways. Yeah. So it strains credulity all the hell to think that that it was with this one bank heist they became tremendously wealthy. But when you begin to look into these connections that they have with different Western intelligence organs and all, then the fact that they're flush with cash starts to make greater sense and everything.
Now, the Con Network basically was created, more or less by the Safari Club. Now, the Safari Club, what was the political milieu in which that was created? You mentioned the Carter and the Halloween Massacre. What was the impetus for it? I know I've mentioned in previous interviews, but a quick brief overview on that situation.
No, you're absolutely right. The milieu in which this emerged was very important and all, because the Safari Club isn't an entity of any one given state. It's a private intelligence group, and we're seeing we basically see with the Safari Club and other organs that rise during this time, privatized intelligence and the rise of private intelligence circles, which can be a lot more dangerous than than the CIA proper, or the FBI proper, or the NSA proper, because these groups have charters that they have to follow. These groups are also answerable to oversight committees. These groups are also have inspector generals that watch and police their behaviors. They basically have some kind of internal affairs structure built into their very being that doesn't keep them entirely from engaging in wrongdoing, but it straddles them. It limits what they can do,
Mm-hmm.
and everything. So, but these private sharks, well, they can swim the ocean free and do a lot more damage and all. And the Safari Club, um, the Safari Club began to emerge during the early the 1970s. And if you look back at 73, America had reached the end of its ground involvement in Vietnam. It had met an ignominious end, and many people, if they're completely honest with themselves, have to see it as a defeat. And the whole Vietnam debacle was being blamed on the establishment, and that's where the blame lie. And the accusatory finger was right in that respect. And so the establishment was weakened by their losses and their failures in Vietnam. And they also, we don't go into this in the article, but we do go into this in some detail in the book, where the article is going, that the book that we're working on, that the article is going to be grafted into. The Vietnam War led to a tremendous schism within the establishment, within the American elite. It led to a breakup in the coalition that had existed between the Southern Rim elite and the old school Northern Yankees, the Northern Basin elite, the Atlanticists.
This is the Yankee Cowboy Alliance that came together to kill Kennedy.
Absolutely,
Well,
absolutely. Yeah. They had come together on Vietnam because Lyndon Johnson, he represented the Southern Southern faction, but his advisors were all holdovers from Kennedy that were Atlanticists, and they had pushed him into the war, and he accepted the war wholesale, the escalation there. But it began to become when it became so expensive that that foreign investors in America were becoming really edgy and were starting to turn in their dollars for gold.
That's right. It brought about the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, brought about it did. It led to the divorce of gold from the dollar, that final divorce. And another story for another day, but it's also going to lead to the rise of the petrodollar.
Yeah,
But
and perhaps more intrigue.
yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So,
But
go ahead. Sorry.
that we had these foreign investors pulling out of the American dollar. The Atlanticists said it's time to pull back. It's time to leave. The Southern Rim said, no, we have to stay the course, and victory is not an option. And defeat is not an option. Victory or nothing, and everything. So we have this tremendous schism that is almost you could almost compare it to the schism between the Roman Catholic and the Orthodox Church, and everything. And with this schism, we have a dispersion of power, and so the establishment was not as strong as it had been previously.
Now, would you say that was kind of like the Waterloo of the WASP establishment, has been called?
Yeah, I can would concede that. I mean,
Yeah.
at least it led to a temporary weakening, a severe weakening, in power. They're still around though, and that
Yeah.
should be not. But
Do you think the Zionists came in and kind of filled the breach there and took advantage and to flex their muscle in the 70s and 80s? That's a kind of a side issue. I'm just wondering if you think that might have factored into the increasing influence of, say, the Jewish lobby in American politics at that point.
I think that contributed,
Okay.
and that they did experience a rise in power in the interim. I think that the formation of the Trilateral Commission helped helped the Atlanticists to begin to pull back and to basically consolidate some of that power again. And
Okay.
I look at I look at Vietnam was basically Atlanticist bankruptcy, and the Trilateral Commission, the formation of the Trilateral Commission was bankruptcy restructuring, and everything is kind of the way that I look at it.
And as you mentioned, also the petrodollar, which is
right, absolutely. But 73, the ground war ends in Vietnam. We're done. 74, they sealed a deal. Not 75. It was 75. The fate is sealed with the Vietnam War because we have the collapse of Saigon at that time. In 74, and Watergate starts to break, and the activities, the abuses on the part of the plumbers and on the part of these different spooks, individuals like E. Howard Hunt, and begins to find its way into the public sphere, and it begins to develop a kind of public outrage and everything. And then in 1976, America had reached its quota with all these intelligence abuses, and we see what was known as the Year of Intelligence. And this is when the Church Committee begins to dig into COINTELPRO. When they begin to dig into CIA's MH chaos. It's when they begin to look into assassinations that had been carried out against foreign leaders. So the purse strings for the Central Intelligence Agency, for the intelligence community here in the United States, were pulled back, and Congress wasn't going to appropriate a nickel to any kind of operations anywhere in the world. So the CIA found themselves strapped. The intelligence community found itself strapped, and so it turned to the Safari Club for help. And the Safari Club, the Saudi elite, more precisely, working through the Safari Club, began to finance covert operations. And among the covert operations that they financed was the financing of Islamic fighters who were against the pro-Soviet government in Kabul in Afghanistan. And this financing began in 1978. And it was part of a larger plan to basically entice the Soviet Union into invading Afghanistan. And this plan has been admitted to in recent years by none other than individuals like Robert Gates, the former CIA DCI, and his book. I believe his book was In the Shadows. I'm pulling from my head extemporaneously here, but I believe his book was From the Shadows or In the Shadows.
was this Operation Cyclone?
I don't want to. I don't want to say. Yeah, I really don't remember the exact name of the operation, but it was Zbigniew Brzezinski also admitted to this. Mm-hmm. He also admitted in an interview with a French journal that that money was going to these fighters, these Islamic fighters that were attacking the pro communist government in Kabul, in order to try to get the Soviet Union to come into Afghanistan, so that America had just America had suffered its Vietnam, and the whole Hegelian game had called for the Soviet Union to now have its own Vietnam, and so that was the purpose, and it worked. It worked because the Soviet Union did in fact end up invading and occupying Afghanistan, and through through covert financing of these Islamic fighters over there, through groups like the Safari Club, we were by we I mean the West were able, but we were able to tie them down there and give them a crushing defeat, and straddle just caused them serious economic woes as a result.
It also facilitated the importation of heroin into Soviet Union, correct? Right.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And this is
So we
around
really were giving them their Vietnam.
yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely correct. This is around the time again that you see Galbudin ex Madiar rise up with the support of the CIA and forming these 6 heroin labs, and under his charge is this young Saudi named Osama bin Laden and everything. But this is where the rise of the Islamic bombs and AQ Khan starts to factor back in.
Well, there's also one other dimension I want to mention. Maybe this Jimmy Carter used this as a pretext for the Carter Doctrine, because the invasion of Afghanistan was sold in the West as a prelude to further aggression.
Right.
And this created the rapid reaction force that later became CENTCOM and the U.S. occupation of the Middle East.
Right, absolutely. So. It also marks a reversal, a change in course for Carter. There was some promise that he was going to be. There was some hope that he was going to be the anti-establishment president that he had promised he was going to be during his campaign, with things like the Halloween massacre, where he's basically throwing out all these covert operatives, these cowboys in the CIA, getting them out of there, and through with his naval associate, his friend Stansfield Turner, who he made DCI and everything.
And he fired George W. Bush.
Right.
H.W. Bush. I'm sorry, H.W. Bush. Yeah.
Basically led to kind of the marginalization of Ted Shackley, the blonde ghost, who's basically considered kind of the master.
Who had recruited one Zbigniew Brzezinski, right, from college?
That's correct. And we go into that in the article. But
I was talking to Michael Jones about that. You listened to the article. He's in the just quickly he said Carter was naive. If he'd been ruthless, he just would have shot these guys.
Yeah. Well, I love the way that Jones put it, because he was like, he proved to be feckless on this. If he just lined these guys up and shot them, that would have been one thing. But he just fires them, and then they go and they're not
going to go away.
Yeah, they're going to find different. They're going to find different enclaves, the same way that the neocons found different enclaves during the Clinton administration. When the Clinton administration came in, they went and they basically found a home with the defense contractors and everything. And then once
publications and think tanks.
Right, absolutely, and everything. And then when George Bush came in, and we had more of a move away from the old Atlanticists under Clinton back to more of a cowboy trajectory, these neocons insinuated themselves back into the political landscape and everything. But Carter, he was on the right track with the Halloween massacre, but he proved to be not much more than a puppet of Brzezinski. Brzezinski, in turn, being a retainer for certain elites, namely David Rockefeller, with whom he formed the Trilateral Commission. And if you look at, for instance, Hamilton Jordan, who was the campaign advisor to Carter, he stated that if after the inauguration of Jimmy Carter, you see Zbigniew Brzezinski becoming the head of national security, then I would say we failed and I quit and everything. Well, lo and behold, just like Jordan predicted, that's what happened. Brzezinski, Carter wins the election, and Brzezinski rises to the head to the post of national security advisor. But Jordan, wasn't completely honest because he didn't
Quit.
tender resignation.
So
Exactly.
I guess the same way that Kissinger was Nixon's handler, Brzezinski was Carter's handler.
Yeah, yeah. Brzezinski, my opinion, through my interpretational lens, and you might feel differently, and other members of the audience might feel differently, but through my interpretational lens, Brzezinski is to the Democrats what Kissinger is to the Republicans.
I think it's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, he's basically an elite retainer that's put into place to make sure that heads of state go along with whatever particular elite circles they represent and everything. So I mean I see them really as counterparts, although they held different positions in government and all their chores, their mission statement was fairly the same
Mm-hmm.
and everything. but Brzezinski, like you pointed out, and he had some really nefarious kind of ties to the intelligence community, and one of those ties was Ted Shackley. Ted Shackley had been the head of the Eastern European division for the CIA at one time, and in that capacity, he had taken on Brzezinski as a recruit, and um, and it, one of Shackley's closest friends was an individual by the name of Edwin Wilson, who was one of the architects of the private intelligence network that allowed groups allowed these criminalized intelligence circles to transcend any kind of accountability. He was one of the architects of this constellation of privatized intelligence that included the Safari Club. And Edwin Wilson had an associate who was a man by the name of Charlie Wilson, the congressman. And there was a movie made by the man starring Tom Hanks called Charlie Wilson's War. And Charlie Wilson and Edwin Wilson worked together with the CIA to basically run interference against any congressional efforts to prevent money from flowing into Pakistan. That money in turn was supposed to be finding its way to Afghanistan and everything.
That was the ISI handling it, right?
Yes, absolutely. Now this is where the Islamic bomb and AQ Khan comes into the picture again. Brzezinski, when he was working to instigate this Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, he presented a memo to Carter, and I believe it's in the article, but I believe that the memo was presented to Carter in 1979. And in that 79 memo, Brzezinski stated that America needs to embark on this covert course of action, basically this covert effort to trick the Soviets into a quagmire in Afghanistan. But it also needs to be noted that with that effort, any efforts to prevent nuclear proliferation in Pakistan are going to have to be dropped and everything, because it was just understood that some of that covert funding, that residuals from that covert funding of the war in Afghanistan, would find its way into Pakistan's nuclear development, nuclear weapons development.
So Brzezinski's selling this to Carter just as a trade-off here.
Yeah, yeah, he's selling it. He's selling it as a trade-off, and he's saying, well, we have to because the only way this plan is going to work is if we have Pakistan's cooperation, and if we don't have it's absolutely imperative that we have their cooperation, or we're not going to be able to create this quagmire. So he's saying he was saying that in essence he was saying that the American government needed to turn a blind eye to the emergent Islamic bomb so as to provide this kind of um, basically settle an old score in the Cold War dialectic and everything. So I mean, the Soviet Union did in fact receive their Vietnam, and Pakistan received their bomb, received the Islamic bomb because the money, some of those covert funds that were going in, that were supposed to be going into into the effort in Afghanistan were actually trimmed off by Pakistani IFI, by the Pakistani government, and put into the to the development of their own nuclear program and everything, which they had been hungry for because of their old rivalry with India. And India, of course, had been a proxy of Russia during, or the Soviet Union, more accurately, during the Cold War, and Pakistan had been a proxy of China during the Cold War, which made them our proxy by extension, because we turned to the Chinese and began to reach out to the Chinese in the belief that in the event that Cold War would turn hot, that China would cast its lot in with us against the Soviet Union.
And of course, India had detonated her bomb in 1974.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, like with that, when that bomb got set off, the clock was ticking. An arms race was already underway between those two countries, and all. We just accelerated things.
Well, at this point, it looks like the Brzezinski is telling Carter that now we're going to have to turn a blind eye in violation of U.S. policy and law, because there's anti-proliferation treaty and there's the Solars Amendment, and which means if they get caught proliferating or developing bomb, aid gets cut off, and that destroys, I guess, their operation in Afghanistan. So what they're saying is we're just going to have to ignore that law. But in the article, you should just more than just turning. You should just more than just turning a blind eye to it, or winking and nodding at it. There's active help in this program from the West.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because I mean, we go into a series of whistleblowers who were catching on to who were onto the con network. Individuals like former FBI translator turned whistleblower Sibel Edmonds, Amin Atif, who was a customs agent for the British. Richard Barlow, who was former CIA. All of these individuals, we go into great detail about their stories in the article. All of these individuals had caught on to some aspect of the relationship between between the West and the con network. For Sibel Edmonds, it was the links between Turkey, the links leading back to Turkey, and the American Turkish Council, and the way that that Turks were used to procure nuclear materials, because they didn't raise the suspicions that Pakistanis raised, or the sale of jets in the case of Richard Barlow. All of these individuals had seen from their own vantage point, this cooperation, this protection that was being afforded to this nuclear black market network. and they were seeing that that basically entities in the United States and in Britain, in England, were protecting were protecting uh, the AQ Khan and his cohorts, which basically begs the question, could Khan have been considered merely an asset himself?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, which you say interesting point you made here is that of course in this operation, obviously other entities or elements within the agency are going to detect it. Because often when we say things like the CIA supporting proliferation, people think we're talking about the CIA as sort of a monolithic organization.
Yeah,
But
that's something I want to point out. I
yeah,
mean, there's the CIA proper, and then there's deep state players within the CIA and individuals that have turned certain sections of the CIA into their own little private intelligence fiefdoms, and yeah, going back. I don't want to get too far off from the article, but if you go back to the National Security Act of 1947, you find that the individual who drafted it was Clark Clifford. Clark Clifford was a Wall Street lawyer, but he did it under the supervision and the oversight of two individuals, John Foster Dulles, who's going to go on to become the Secretary of State, I believe, under Eisenhower, and Alan Dulles, who is going to become the DCI, Director of Central Intelligence, under Kennedy. Both of them were lawyers for what is the most powerful, what was the most powerful, and still is a very powerful Wall Street firm known as Sullivan and Cromwell, and everything. So when they were drafting this, when they were putting together the National Security Act of 1947, they of course made sure that loopholes were built into that act that would play to the advantage of the corporate interests that they were representing. And so, and as a result of their involvement in the drafting of the act that would basically create our modern intelligence community, the CIA in particular, but our intelligence community in general, has suffered this kind of this Jekyll Hyde personality disorder, where and in the article, what, for instance, we go into Valerie Plame, and her story, really illustrates this Jekyll Hyde kind of personality disorder that we see. I mean, because she was part of Brewster Jennings. Brewster Jennings was a counter-proliferation front, was a front for what was actually a front for a CIA counter-proliferation group that was trying to stop the spread of nuclear materials through the Khan network. And there's a sizable amount of evidence that her outing as a CIA operative had more to do with the fact that that she was that she and this counter-proliferation unit were cracking down on Khan than it had to do on her husband's work as far as WMDs in Iraq
mm-hmm.
and everything. So I mean, like that her story, which we do go into in the article, her story really illustrates what you're talking about there, because you see a lot of good CIA people there doing what they should be doing, and then you see the dark side also simultaneously working to frustrate those efforts.
Yeah, because you can look at the National Security Act of 1947, sure, as a consummation of a sort of a incestuous relationship between the government and corporations,
Absolutely.
and it was formalized in 1940. These arrangements obviously predated the National Security Act, and you can see them going as far back, as the Spanish American War.
Oh, absolutely.
So, but this, yeah, it formalizes this untoward relationship, and that's why when someone like a firm like Sullivan and Cromwell and the Dulles brothers, they embody the what we're talking about. The system is sort of this corporatist system of intelligence and government and corporations, because they're doing the bidding of corporations abroad. They're as Medley Butler said, I was a muscle man for for Wall Street boys and the big banks.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
he basically describes himself as a repo man.
yeah,
That's
and
what I mean. Like it's sad, he's this decorated Marine Corps soldier and everything, and but when you get down to where the rubber meets the road, all that he can really describe himself as in the end is kind of a glorified repo man.
yeah, and so this is where, again, this is where we get this tension, because I think it was Fletcher Prouty in his book Secret Team said the biggest cover story for the Central Intelligence Agency is that it's an intelligence agency. So,
Right.
I mean, you have this intelligence apparatus that's created to employ a bunch of people, and they're doing their job, but over there at the DO, that's where you get all the spooks are doing the black ops and
Exactly. That I mean, and that's what we're talking about here. Is we're talking about the director of operations that finds themselves in dire straits come around 1973 to 1976, the year of intelligence. The DO finds themselves, the director of operations finds themselves, in a dilemma. How are we going to finance these operations? We got to keep the ball rolling. We have corporate interests that we represent. We have, there's elite circles, elite cliques that we have to do the bidding of and everything. So where's the money going to come from? And since the rise of these private private intelligence organs like the Safari Club and all the involvement thereafter in basically this nuclear proliferation that we're talking about.
And of course, the intelligence agency's experience, and I would argue origins in the opium trade, drug trafficking, is a lucrative business and a source of black op of funding for a lot of these operations. They're off the books operations, things like that.
Well, that was another reason for going into Afghanistan, because we had lost our labs. When I use these pronouns, I don't mean we as in you and I and everything. But the West had lost their labs in the Golden Triangle and everything.
Mhm.
Everything that had been taken over from the French and from those Corsican mobs had been lost with the fall of Saigon and with the end of ground involvement over there in Southeast Asia. The influence just wasn't there as it once was.
And that's one interpretation of the Vietnam War is I guess you could say the old money Eastern establishment pushing out the French, and that's why we didn't protect them at Bien Dien Phu, right?
Actually, because we wanted to slip into bed with the Hmong people over there in Thailand, and oh gosh, I can't remember the name of that of the opium warlord that we were in bed with over there, but he headed up the Hmong people, the Hmong tribesmen, and it'll come to me eventually, but yeah, we wanted to step into that relationship there and form a new. What's that? No, not. Oh gosh, I'll remember it here in a few minutes and everything. But
and was that money coming in like in through Mexico, then being laundered to Las Vegas?
Well, it's funny because in Vegas you had the Lansky syndicate, and some of the money was finding its way through the Lansky syndicate. But I also believe that some of the money was eventually through Hughes, because Howard Hughes,
right.
after he was basically after the Eastern establishment pushed him out of his own companies like Toolco and like the aviation company that he had. That's where he moved. He took some assets that he had left over from that legal fight there and went and began to push and muscle his way into Las Vegas and eventually came up against the Lansky syndicate and everything. So,
And
but
even and before that, of course, you had the French connection, which was pretty. You could say it was established during World War II with Lucky Luciano, and
right.
the deal struck there. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely. Luciano and basically, this deal cut to basically get out of prison and everything, or to get a cushy kind of punishment, and to help basically get rid of the socialist on the docks, and to help out Patton's army
mhm.
during invasion over in Italy. Yeah, it goes back to all that too, and everything, like you were saying, and everything.
But all these convenient relationships, these excuses for drug running and all, and they become very lucrative, so they become also self-justifying. You can see how people involved with them don't want to let them go because there's a lot of money involved here.
Oh
So
yeah, absolutely. It's hard to let it go when you got a good thing going and everything.
when you think of people like the careers of people like Richard Secord and what he was doing it with during the Iran Contra thing, but he was doing that back in Air America back in the '60s in Vietnam.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring him up. Richard Secord, yeah, he's a primary example. He's a good illustration of the principle that you're trying to, basically flesh out here. During the Iran Contra hearings, I recall, they asked him, "Were you doing?" Because I mean, there was a lot of Contras that felt screwed. I mean, they were getting a lot of cruddy equipment or
Mm-hmm.
second rate stuff, and they're paying top dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And Secord is and his partner Hakim,
Albert Hakim, yeah.
yeah, the Iranian, they're making money hand over fist. And so during the hearings, they ask Secord, they're like, well, were you doing this for patriotic purposes, or were you doing it for money? What was your motive? And I love this answer. He's like, well, can't I have two motives? So yeah, I mean, like it goes. That I think that pretty much illustrates the principle that you're trying to flesh out there.
But yeah, you want to bring in the drugs to pay for the guns you send in, and the guns to create the destabilization, to create the environment that you can keep the drug trade going, so the drug trade can buy the guns. So all in all, why are you doing it at all? Well, you're doing it just so you can bring in the drug, send the guns, bring in the drugs, and make the money.
Right.
So there's no,
Well,
so
that actually leads us into something into another realm, in another part of the conversation, which appears in the article. I mean, like what the things that you're bringing up there, it's all economic determinism.
yeah, that
And
you have that segue there. That
yeah,
you make all the connect. There's obviously to carry out an operation like this, you're gonna have to grease the skids with a lot of money because
right.
that's how you get people to do things for you.
Right. But
So yeah,
and it's really easy to become an economic determinist when looking at these things, because fleshing out a lot of the deep state narrative and a lot of the hidden history, it can be done by following the money,
hmm
as the Watergate refrain went, is following that money trail. So you begin to see it all as the motive as being money, and so
and,
economic.
but no, it's funny. No, it's funny about that point though.
What's that?
Is we're told to follow the money. Now that remark could have been apocryphal, but I understand the reason behind it is that's deep throat telling them to do this. What we know about Watergate now is that itself was a diversion.
Right.
so
Absolutely.
so it goes to your point. There's a deeper dimension to Watergate
Yeah.
that we won't get into now, but that's good point. Following the money gets you a part of the truth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, economic determinism. I mean, both alternative and mainstream researchers are immersed in it
hmm
because they are so dependent on following money trails. And money trails, admittedly, that's the way to basically kind of help at least give you a skeletal outline of these criminal infrastructures
hmm
and everything. But it's a flawed view, still in all, because it holds that the players that are in the areas of politics, of finance and social engineering are motivated solely by money and all. But when you look at the heavy hitters in the deep state, in the sub rosa level of politics, when you look at the heavy hitters, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Astors, go on down the line of these financier oligarchs, they already have all the money that they could ever dream of, or that they could ever use, and everything. Proponents of this economic economic determinism, they're failing to recognize the fact that money is a means to an end, and it's basically the money that you're bringing in, how much revenue you're bringing in, the volume that you're bringing in is a way of gauging the success of your real enterprise and everything. And that real enterprise is more ideological in nature, and these deeper ideological motivations for world events and are getting bleached out when people come to their final when the people come to the final analysis. And that's true not only with drugs, as you were bringing up, Tim, but also it's true with nuclear proliferation, which is the main thing that we look at in our article. There is a deeper ideological motivation for spreading this destructive weapon all over the world and making sure that it reaches pariah nations and rogue states.
And this is ultimately creating a pretext for one world government or the New World Order?
That's correct. That's correct. The idea, the cult of the superweapon, the idea that behind the cult of the superweapon is that there is the discovery of a weapon that is so destructive and so it just could lead to extinction and all, that it provides the rulers, the powers that be, finally with the weapon that will allow them to coerce and blackmail the rest of the world into accepting their utopian vision of world order.
Like I said earlier, the super weapon has appeared throughout quite a bit of American science fiction, particularly during the between 1880 and the First World War. It was within that time frame that you have this particular literary trend among sci-fi authors, where there's the depiction of this super weapon, and the super weapon, its exact nature, it remains relatively nebulous. It's a tabula rasa. It assumes various forms.
Yeah, it's going to have many different incarnations.
It can be poisonous gas. It can be laser beams. It can be bombs, in particular the atom bomb. But the super weapon itself, this imaginative construct, this very vague, nebulous notion, is imbued with eschatological significance. And the reason that is because the superweapons invocation in history, it introduces what could be called the beyond. The beyond is essentially a set of circumstances, an entity, a certain force that is noumenal and that dwarfs humanity epistemologically and ontologically. It's not something that humanity has ever experienced before. And its introduction into human affairs necessitates the empowerment of an elite few, a few oligarchs. The rationale underpinning the hegemony of these oligarchs is inherently technocratic, because the rationale goes something like this: we need people with scientific and technical expertise to address this force from beyond. And democratic institutions, constitutional republics, nation states, parliaments, they simply are not equipped to deal with this force from beyond.
Well, it's interesting because Brzezinski's role in proliferation, or at least facilitating it with the operations in Afghanistan, and you mentioned technocratic order, technocracy. Of course, he wrote the book, right? The
Right,
technocratic
and,
order. So he's the
right,
ultimate technocrat, or at least the ultimate advocate of technocracy. So
right. And as Frank Fisher observes in his book, Technocracy and the Politics of Expertise, the term techneutronic era, a neologism invoked by Brzezinski, is merely a euphemism for post-industrial civilization. And in turn, this neologism, post-industrial civilization, is synonymous with technocracy.
mm-hmm.
But technocracy, in classical political terms, really denotes a form of governance where scientists and technicians basically supplant Plato's philosopher kings, because they can lay claim to specialized knowledge. They are, in essence, in possession of a socio-political gnosis. And this, of course, is all really just a Gnostic political religion, because here you have, the traditional Gnostic theme of secret knowledge of a gnosis. But when confronting the superweapon, this force from beyond, this ontologically and epistemologically overwhelming, irresistible force, invariably the solution involves the abolition of the nation states, the homogenization of all countries into a political singularity, into a single global state. And with the emergence of that global state, you see what some theoreticians like Francis Fukuyama refer to as the end of history.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the end of history is an eschatological hope. The end of history traditionally was something that was yearned for within religious faiths, in particular the monotheistic faiths of the world, like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And so this was an eschatological hope of those faiths, and now it's been transposed into the realm of socio-political theory.
And in pop culture, of course, in the 1950s, we had the day the Earth stood still.
Right, exactly. That entire title reeks of eschatological hopes. And the problem is that whereas in the monotheistic faiths of the world, you have the end of history, the eschaton, being ushered in by the hand of God Himself. That history is finally brought to its end through it. Well, in the case of Orthodox Christianity, the parousia, or the second coming. In this case, the eschaton is ushered in by the hands of man himself. And so we have this very anthropocentric soteriology. Salvation comes through the hands of man himself. And this is why another reason why it's a distinctly Gnostic outlook, because Gnostics themselves were also proponents of self-salvation. That the individual gains salvation through their own efforts, through their possession of gnosis. And so that's the entire ends towards which the super weapon is the super weapon is designed. It's designed to bring about the immanentization of the eschaton, the drawing of the eschaton into history, and thereby laying waste to history, ending history entirely, and immobilizing the world in a state of utopian permanence. And that's why the superweapon has this eschatological and very mystical quality to it. We're not simply talking about bombs. We're not simply talking about laser beams. We're not simply talking about poison gas. We're talking about a force that can actually bring about heaven on earth in the view of the technocrats, the technocratic elite that invoke this force routinely throughout human affairs. Oh, go ahead, sir.
So, but obviously, we're taught through history, the textbooks, that the Manhattan Project was a crash program to design the atomic bomb, to beat the Germans in the race, and it ended the war by forcing Japan to surrender in August 1945. Now, I don't believe that account of history. I think the facts suggest something far different was going on. Japan was ready to surrender, and she tried to surrender, and we ignored her because we wanted to test the bomb. We wanted to demonstrate the bomb. And I think remarks from Henry Stimson and James Burns prove that. But what you're saying is the Manhattan Project had a much more esoteric justification or mission.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the Manhattan Project was what could be characterized as a sociocultural Gedanken experiment. Mm-hmm. A Gedanken experiment is the German word for thought experiment, and for all practical purposes, the thought experiment or Gedanken experiment basically involves the tangible enactment of hypothetical scenarios in hopes of resculpting reality and the generation of a new consensus. Ideas are introduced into the intellectual ether through science fiction. As a matter of fact, it was John W. Campbell who wrote the sci-fi classic Who Goes There, which later on became The Thing from Another World and was later on remade in the early 80s by John Carpenter as The Thing, which ironically is really just a metaphorical critique of Cold War politics. But John W. Campbell basically stated that sci-fi, that the literary genre of science fiction, represented an unparalleled opportunity for sociocultural Gedanken experiments. Now, why is that? Well, because certain normative claims, and of course normative claims involve the positing of an ought, how things ought to be, are insinuated into the minds of the percipients or the readers, the audience, through the willful suspension of disbelief. We are presented with these fantastical narratives, and then embedded within these fantastical narratives are certain normative claims. Typically in the literary genre of sci-fi, you'll find a lot of those normative claims are techno-utopian in character. They tend to be normative claims such as there ought to be a single transnational authority that brings an end to war so as to prevent the extinction of humanity and facilitate unbridled, unceasing scientific progress towards utopia and always towards other eschatological hopes that were traditionally the province of religion, such as immortality. You find ultimate questions of meaning, metaphysical questions being answered not by supreme beings, but by aliens. And typically the noumenal world, the noumenal realm, that which is supposed to transcend the ontological confines of the physical world, is transposed into space itself, into the cosmos. And so we voyage into space to find ultimate meaning. We don't turn towards a God who ontologically transcends the physical universe. Instead, we're looking within the confines of that physical universe because supposedly an intramundane divinity indwells it. For instance, Star Trek 5, which is certainly not the best of that particular franchise. It's kind of a cheesy entry, but it exemplifies what I'm talking about, because when they go looking for God in that particular installment, where do they go looking? They go looking for a planet. They go looking within the confines of the physical universe itself. And so the implication is that God is not supramundane, but is instead intramundane. And so there we have, this pantheistic notion of God, that God is a force that indwells materiality itself. Which probably, is what's that?
I'm saying it's probably much of what's behind a lot of the obsession with extraterrestrials and ufology, they call
it. And this actually, it's interesting you bring that up, Tim, because the cult of the superweapon, and we're going to go into this in our book, actually gives way to the cult of the UFO, because there's just an overlap in narrative in thematic a sharing of thematic threads there, and a sharing of certain elements.
Yeah. And one of the reasons that is given typically for the arrival of aliens, of extraterrestrials, is the detonation of the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah, if you look at George Adamski, for instance, this famous contactee who spoke with this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Nordic-looking individual in the desert, this supposed extraterrestrial. The extraterrestrial tells him that his race has taken an interest in the Earth because of all the nuclear activity that they have seen going on. Well, I mean, Adamski, some people just consider him a loon or basically a member of the racist fringe because of his associations with William Dudley Pelley, who started the Silver Legion, and his racist soulcraft religion and all. But what a lot of people don't realize is that George Adamski there was a lawyer, I believe a lawyer out of Cincinnati, that wanted to sue Adamski and everything for mail fraud, because he was using the U.S. Postal Service to disseminate his information about his contact with this Nordic from another world, and he went to he brought his case to the government and all, and the CIA's lawyer said that he had a case, but Alan Dulles came back and threatened a court injunction against anybody that might bring a case against George Adamski. And now this is Alan Dulles running interference for this guy and everything. And so, again, like Adamski is one of those examples of an individual who provides an overlap between the cult of the superweapon and the cult of the UFO. Mm-hmm. And everything. And that's a story for another day, and it's certainly one that we're going into with great depth in our book. But I mean, it just, when you said what you said there, it stoked that, and I thought I would throw that out there.
And he seemed to be I guess copying the theme of The Day There Stood Still, right? Doesn't
Yeah, absolutely. And not only he, I mean, like, again, like this supposed blonde haired, blue eyed extraterrestrial, talking about his race taking an interest in Earth because of nuclear activity they saw going on here. That's not the only example. I mean, I believe it was Harold Dahl, the dock policeman, who was at the alleged UFO incident at Maury Island. I mean, he claimed that that these aliens that he had supposedly come in contact with, what happened is this saucer had began to ooze like molten metallic material that injured his son and killed his dog and everything. He also claimed that these aliens had taken an interest in the Earth because of nuclear activity.
Mm-hmm.
And Harold Dahl's boss was Fred Chrisman. Fred Chrisman was the guy that Clay Shaw called when he was indicted by Jim Garrison for JFK in the JFK assassination. So again,
wasn't Guy Bannister involved in that too?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, Guy Bannister was involved. I'm not trying to go too far afield, but he was involved in the anti-communist, the World Anti-Communist League through the Anti-Communist League of the Caribbean, which I hope I'm saying it was basically a Caribbean subsidiary of the World Anti-Communist League. And the World Anti-Communist League it involved such heavy hitters as Daniel Graham, Lieutenant General Daniel Graham, who started the High Frontier, which promotes the latest incarnation of the superweapon, namely space-based weapons,
Mm-hmm.
SDI, promoting Reagan's vision in keeping his vision of a Star Wars program alive. But the World Anti-Communist League was also involved in the creation of the whole of the whole Nephilim myth that we see, this latest incarnation of the UFO phenomena, of the UFO deception, namely quote unquote Christian ufology. Because William Stuart McBurney, who was a member of another World Anti-Communist League subsidiary under General John Sinclair, he started this diploma mill, and the diploma mill included among its ranks I.D.E. Thomas, who wrote the book The Omega Conspiracy, which held that basically, that watchers were coming down and impregnating women and creating the Nephilim, and that that basically the UFO phenomena was just the latest installation in what was going on in the antediluvian world, and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's really convoluted. But my point is that
it's a psyop.
Yeah, my point is that
when you look at the Watcher Nephilim narrative, which many fringe fundamentalists they've embraced, believing that it brings absolute, complete, and total explanatory unity to the Old Testament narrative, and that it can explain everything. It provides a rationale for everything. One of those all-purpose narrative devices.
Mm-hmm.
First off, when you look at it, theologically, it creates several problems for the Orthodox Christian, because it actually, if you're going to assert that evil can indwell humanity as an actual genetic lineage, You've basically concretized evil. You've assigned it an ontological status. It now inhabits a gene. It's now a gene. It's now genetic. And the problem with that is that projects evil outside of the intangible will, and it projects it onto the tangible world. And invariably, what you arrive at from that projection is a docetistic cosmological attitude, not unlike that of the ancient Gnostics, which were not especially friendly towards Orthodox Christianity.
And so you can see why Lynn Marzulli, who is one of these fringe nuts that received an honorary degree from IDE Thomas, and basically, followed IDE Thomas's whole Watcher Nephilim UFO theory. Why he would say he looks at a blue-eyed Chinese child and says, "Oh, look, the Nephilim are back."
Yeah, and see that's where invariably this sort of thinking leads. It leads to almost the Manichaean partitioning off of humanity into the kingdoms of light and darkness.
Yeah,
which is not unlike the Manichaean epistemology of, say, Adolf Hitler, who had categorized humanity as either the Aryan or the Jew. Or, in the case of Cold War epistemology, we have the East against the West, and we have the kingdom of darkness being the Soviet Union, which Reagan, in a very Manichaean fashion, characterized as the evil empire, and then the kingdom of light being the good West, the good West led by the United States. Forget for the moment that it's perpetrating evils that are equally as deplorable as those that are perpetrated by the Soviet Union.
Using the same techniques.
Yes, using the exact same techniques. But this partitioning off of humanity according to this genetic criteria invariably results in the racism, eugenics, and you look at Christian identity theology. It's almost entirely it's almost exactly identical to this Nephilim Watcher narrative.
I think a lot of these ideas, I think, are nurtured or fostered by the powers that be, by the intelligence communities, to create this confusion.
That's certainly what we espouse in what we espouse in the book we're working on. I mean, with Christian identity and everything, that whole subculture is just saturated with agent provocateurs, with federal. I mean, like you look at Elohim City, for instance, that was involved in the OKC bombing, all the way up to Reverend Millar there at OKC. I mean, they were all federal agents.
It's the same reason why these cults throughout history have ties to intelligence, whether it's the People's Temple, or this, or even the Manson cult. Some
right.
Has ties. These things are, they're assets. They can do things. Satanic cults can do things. They can run drugs. They can engage in child pornography or child trafficking, human trafficking, and they can be handled, and they can do these things and be held at arm's length, and it creates plausible deniability, for the intelligence agencies.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And what the
same way the mob did hits for the intelligence agencies, so it's the same principle,
Right.
So.
And the dark ends towards which these fringe fundamentalists who subscribe to this narrative with absolute religious zeal, unbending, unerring religious zeal, the natural ends towards which they are heading is eventually probably some sort of some sort of terrorism, or some sort of race war, because invariably you have to conclude that if evil can be concretized and it can be basically embedded intrinsically, ontologically, as a gene in humanity, that there's going to be a strain of humanity that is other than human. That it's going to have to be an or a human angelic hybrid. And so, if you think this isn't a very compelling motivation for people to carry out acts of terrorism, then all I have to do is direct your attention towards British Israelism, which basically was another variant of Christian identity, and this motivated empire, this motivated genocide against black people in Africa.
But the fringe fundamentalist subculture is not only manipulated through the cult of the UFO, it's also manipulated through the cult of the Superweapon, which we go into in the article when we look at the Council for National Policy and its founder Tim LaHaye, who writes this book, which is normative fiction, just like the other pieces of normative fiction we cite in the book, in our article. He writes this Left Behind series.
Yeah.
And it's normative fiction, and it basically holds that nuclear war is a foregone conclusion. It's a requirement for the apocalyptic vision of St. John to become a reality and everything. But the reason I went off on this whole tangent is to just basically show that there is an overlap between the cult of the superweapon and the cult of the UFO, and that actually in the book what we assert is that the cult of the UFO is born out of the cult of the superweapon. It's a logical outgrowth, and I know that's kind of we kind of taken it kind of far field of your original question about the Manhattan Project, but it still fits, and now it still fits the theme of what we're talking about.
But but the use of the bomb, the detonation of the bomb over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they weren't military targets; they were civilian targets. In fact, they were Christian cities, which is, you point that out in the article, which might have some significance. But it was done to demonstrate. Henry Simpson said it must be a demonstration in order to make war no longer possible.
Right. It will in particular at that time make to be a deterrent to Stalin in the post-war world. But that's the ultimate end, is to basically usher in the age of permanent peace through permanent coercion, using an instrument that could bring about the extinction of mankind. So it was basically about raising what we call in the article, what we refer to as nuclear anxiety, and basically raising people's fear of nuclear extinction, so that they will accept some kind of world governing body that can supervise the manufacture and the use of these weapons, and basically take over a managerial position when it comes to these weapons, and also as an alternative to ending the world in a mushroom cloud and everything. But
when you look at the reading selections of Leo Szilard, who was the Hungarian-American physicist who actually conceived the nuclear chain reaction, and he worked on the Manhattan Project, you'll find in his personal library The World Set Free by H.G. Wells. And again, it's within that novel that Wells coins the term atomic bomb. And that narrative embedded within his mind the seeds of this idea of this super weapon that could bring about the end of history itself. And so in that sense, the Manhattan Project qualifies as a socio-cultural Gedanken experiment. You have with the Manhattan Project a tangible enactment of an idea that is rendered palpable in science fiction literature. And again, one of the reasons that science fiction literature is so effective at rendering these ideas palpable is because it induces the willing suspension of disbelief. And there's an excellent essay by a literary critic by the name of Martha A. Barter, wherein she shows how the willing suspension of disbelief induced by science fiction literature makes it possible for readers to test how ideas might work, actually see how the tangible enactment of otherwise abstract ideas embedded within science fiction narratives, see how they might alter alter reality itself and bring about a new consensus, a new cultural consensus within the society where those ideas are tangibly enacted. And so you see with Leo Szilard, he was actually putting to use the ideas that he imbibed from Wells's narrative in the World Set Free.
And that's just the science fiction the science fiction's influence on the R&D, the research and development side of things. On the political side of things, we saw science fiction have affecting a change on the mind of Truman, who is going to be the one that authorizes the dropping of the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. He was influenced by several different nuclear fantasies that he read in McClure's magazine, and so again you see this Gedanken experiment not only affecting things on the R&D side, but also on the political side of things as well. But this impact on Leo Szilard, this influence that was exercised over his mind, was probably intentional, and we can make that assertion on the basis of a perusal of H.G. Wells' credentials, of his overall resume. And if you look at it, it reads like an oligarchic who's who. I mean, with H.G. Wells, he was a member of the Coefficients Club. The Coefficients Club was, of course, formed by Beatrice and Sidney Webb, who were Fabian socialists, and that organization basically gathered together most of the Britain's most educated minds and prominent social critics and thinkers to discuss what course British Empire should take. And the Coefficients Club entertained this very disturbing, very unsettling preoccupation with war. Its members were constantly discussing war, in particular Leopold Maxey. He consistently promoted a militant stance against Germany. He was extremely anti-German. And this, by the way, was in the pre-war period. He believed that the 1918 victory against Germany should have been exploited by the Allies as an opportunity to destroy Germany altogether, to wipe her out. And so you have this one particular Coefficients member before World War II, yet again promoting another war with the Germans. And interestingly enough, you have H.G. Wells in the shape of things to come, prognosticating, and I say prognosticating in quotes, the outbreak of World War II. And he predicts this event with some uncanny precision. I mean, there's some areas where his crystal ball is fuzzy, and not all the dates are exactly, made with pinpoint accuracy. But he sees this Second World War, this next global conflagration. He sees it with some very, very uncanny precision. So one must wonder if H.G. Wells wasn't simply outlining in a fictional context plans that he was probably privy to through elite machinations such as the Coefficients Club. But this overall preoccupation with war actually drove one of its members, the Coefficients Club's member Bertrand Russell, out of its ranks. And I'm saying this as not with no particular love or affinity for Bertrand Russell. The man was a repugnant creature. He was a proponent of population control. He advocated the imposition of certain limits to growth, to infrastructure, basically infrastructural apartheid, and he was also an atheist.
He hated the Chinese.
Yeah, he despised the Chinese. He was a very, very repugnant man. But that being said, even the Coefficients Club, with its preoccupation with war, even a man such as Bertrand Russell found his moral sensibilities bruised by that preoccupation. And so that should tell you a little something about one of the elite machinations and one of the deviantly criminal milieus that was inhabited by H.G. Wells, that shaped H.G. Wells' thinking, and in turn shaped the ideas that he presented in his literature, such as The World Set Free. So you can see where these ideas are emanating from very dark corners.
And they're infecting Leo Szilard's mind.
And who's meeting with Franklin Roosevelt, right?
Right,
Yeah,
absolutely. And so it's going to lead to this Godonkin experiment, which is in turn is going to become the cult of the superweapon in embryo, because that's the way that we look at the Manhattan Project. Is that it's really the beginning of the cult of the superweapon in earnest, and we also are going to see within the Manhattan Project the schism in the cult of the superweapon. In other words, we're going to see the formation of two different of kind of a sectarian sectarian division, two sects starting up, namely the Pax Universalis sect and the Pax Americana sect.
Yeah, it's one thing I wanted to address before we close out the interview was that division there. But one observation is you're talking about the Coefficients Club.
Yeah.
So this elite gathering of the movers and shakers, the intellectuals of the British Empire.
Yes,
you have
sir.
people. You have H.G. Wells, I guess, sipping tea with Edward Grey. I guess.
Yeah.
But it's
Gray was also tied to the Round Tables.
The Round Table, that's the Rhodes Trust, because Rhodes Trust is also used with the Rhodes, of course, the
and
Rhodes
that-
Scholarship, which is used with incorporating America back into the British Empire.
Right, absolutely.
And that might explain why he knew something about the coming war. That might explain why he knew something about the coming of the Second World War, because the counterpart to the Round Table groups here in America, the stateside sister organizations, Council on Foreign Relations, well, two major founding council members, John Foster Dulles and his brother Alan, were the movers and shakers behind the Versailles Treaty, and they were the ones that basically made sure that the stipulation that Germany pay the majority of war reparations appeared in the treaty, and it's obvious that expecting them to pay the majority of the war reparations is going to lead to the destruction of their economy. It's going to lead to the fall of the Republic in Germany, and it's going to lead to the radicalization of those people. So everything is in place for another war.
Well, with the radicalization of the German population, you can see why this would why the imposition of these unfair reparations would make the embracing of a totalitarian, of a tyrannical ruler like Adolf Hitler,
much more enticing, because what did Adolf Hitler do immediately when he came to power? He cut off the reparations. He said no more. We'll make no more payments. Well, obviously, for a people who are beset by just hyperinflation, rabid hyperinflation, their currency is basically worthless.
Yeah, you're basically leaving work several times during the day,
Yeah.
during lunch break. You're getting your pay. You're getting paid several different times during the day, leaving work and going and spending the money right then and there, because you're guaranteed that by the end of an 8 or 12-hour workday, the money that you've earned is worth less by the end of that workday.
Yeah, but so you see where you've precipitated the conditions wherein a tyrant such as Adolf Hitler can rise to power, because obviously for people that are beset by so many financial hardships, his act, his first opening act as the dictator in Germany, was to end the reparations, and that automatically, in the eyes of the German people, would have elevated him to the status of if not a saint, certainly a hero, because he was in their view rescuing them from financial ruination.
But the Coefficients Club, it's very similar to what Norman Dodd in the Reese Committee discovered regarding the foundations and the minutes that were, I think, the investigator Catherine Casey found in 1909, when they openly talked about planning for a series of wars involving the United States to collectivize the country.
Yeah, in 1909, the Carnegie Foundation looked into the question of whether there was any other social change agent as powerful as war. If there was anything other than war that was as effective in changing the social landscape. The answer they reached was no. So the next question was, naturally, how do we involve America in a war?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I believe that's what you're referring to there.
Yeah, and so again, what's being suggested, or what the evidence suggests, is that these events that are given to us as sort of bolt out of the blue, or accidental, or just policy mistakes or poor judgment on the part of our leaders, these things are actually sort of scripted.
Well, I'm hesitant to use the verb scripted. I mean, certainly that's what their architects have in mind. There's a very definite set of events, one following after another, in a very definite narrative. Obviously, the best laid plans of mice and men, though, invariably encounter reality. It collides.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying, I don't think the West anticipated the collapse of France in this.
Right, exactly.
It's funny that you bring that up. They don't anticipate everything, because in the article we point out that the Pax Universalis sect. Mm-hmm. That we find among its ranks Robert Oppenheimer. Robert Oppenheimer believes, as does the rest of the Pax Universalis sect, that you have to internationalize the bomb.
Okay, yes. Let's. The Pax Americana sect believed that you nationalize the bombs, that America would be the vehicle for this New World Order, that America would have a monopoly on the bomb and flex her muscle to control the world. The Pax Universal sect believed that internationalizing the bomb and then creating the pretext for the global government. And so Robert Oppenheimer and some of these other people involved in the espionage that gave the Soviet Union the bomb were trying to bring about that condition. Is that a correct summation?
Okay. That's correct. Correct. He's passing nuclear secrets through individuals like Sudoplatov to the Soviet Union, and ensuring that they develop a bomb.
So it's not Marxism or communism that they're doing this for. It's it's another vision. They want to universalize the bomb or internationalize it. And the only way to do this is to give the Soviet Union the bomb. So America has to negotiate with the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
The goal was to balance the scales.
Well, and also it's also to basically force the world into accepting like a world government structure that would prevent an arms race between the Soviet Union and America.
How did
And
that work?
It didn't work out. It didn't work out. And Stalin didn't play.
Yeah.
Stalin didn't play, and instead, what we got was a Cold War, and so they shifted the script and began to work on basically a dialectic, and slowly begin to increase the amount of nuclear anxiety in the West and in the East, in the hopes of bringing it to a place where both sides would just be scared to. They're scared to death of one another until they'll come to the table and as an alternative to nuclear extinction, accept some kind of merger.
Yeah.
And
Therein is the ultimate motivation for the introduction into the narrative of politics of the beyond, of a force that is ontologically and epistemologically overwhelming. The whole reason for its introduction is to pave the way for the presentation of a deus ex machina, a god from the machine, in this case being a one world state.
But you're going to have to go through several years of scaring the hell out of people with several different cultural artifacts that we go into in the article, namely here in the United States, a movie with Jason Robards that basically scared the poop out of all of us on ABC the day after.
Mm-hmm.
That was a major social engineering tool. In the East. We have examples of nuclear anxiety being built among the Soviet population through different aspects of Iran Contra, and I don't go into this in the article, but we will go into this in the book. Ollie North was moving weapons and equipment out of reforger sites in Western Europe, and to basically go into the Contra cause and to go into the operations that they had to destabilize Nicaragua. And as he moved these weapons out, this equipment out of NATO depots, out of NATO reforger sites and weapons depots over in the West, it increased the likelihood that the United States would employ nuclear weapons in the event of a Soviet advance into Western Europe, a Warsaw Pact advance into Western Europe. Well, the fact that there was this increased potential for the use of for the employment of nuclear weapons due to a depletion in NATO reforger sites was actually passed to the Soviet Union through a spy trade, through a trade that we made with them and everything. We wanted them to know that there was a high probability that we would use weapons in the event of a Warsaw Pact advance. And so it basically raised that nuclear anxiety over in the East. And these are just two examples of just how our minds were slowly and methodically infested with fear of nuclear extinction until to the point that if world government is presented as the alternative, that we will accept it wholeheartedly to prevent the world from, ending in a gigantic mushroom cloud.
Mm-hmm. Of course, in the 50s, we had the, hide under your desks.
Yeah. And it's like what Lewis Black, the comedian, said, they're having me hide under a desk. It's made of wood. I'm kindling at this point, and just the those kind of exercises and their contradictory, their contradictory nature because, well, I'm hiding under a wooden desk. Okay, good luck with that. We're just meant to increase the fear and just increase this paralytic kind of anxiety to where it's you're going to eventually hand it over to a kind of a superstructure, an international superstructure that says we will manage the development and the use of these weapons so as to ensure the survival of the human race.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it's exactly as you said, Tim.
So, and of course, you have the broader issue of the Cold War itself. To what extent do you believe the Cold War, at one level, it was real? Certainly
Yeah.
for the people in Vietnam and Korea and the soldiers, the U.S. GIs went over there and sent over there to kill or be killed or kill and get killed. It was real, and maybe for many of the spies and it was real and all that. But to what extent do you think it was stage managed or crafted to create this world? This world of anxiety and fear at one level, at a meta level, it was being managed, and really, it really wasn't a conflict. It was more of a deal struck by the elites to justify all the debt, all the war expenditure, all the conflict, all the fear. Because if you're familiar with the work of Anthony Sutton, and
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. And what he points out about captured economies and
mm-hmm.
is very, very important. Very, very important. That's a very complex question with no easy answer. What we see is that we have this Cold War narrative presented to the public as the forces of totalitarianism versus the forces of freedom, and there are factions that are very honest, that were honestly fighting for the American ideal, and there are forces that are very honest, that are honestly fighting for the Soviet ideal. And then on the sub rosa level, we have actually like these different elite circles in both the East and the West
Mm-hmm.
that 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 engage in a periodic symbiosis, and the best way of describing it, I mean, I would draw from the movie From Russia with Love. The spy who is meant to seduce Bond very much believes in the Soviet idea, but she has no idea that she's not working for Smersh anymore. She's working for Spectre and everything. So and
I think we're dealing with Spectre, right? That's
yeah,
what we're dealing with now. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, so these sub rosa forces in both the East and the West could be considered to be, the equivalent of Spectre in reality, and
Well, at a certain level, I think it's like a business plan.
yeah. Well, I mean,
It's like during World War II when Standard Oil was supplying Luftwaffe with aviation fuel.
right, right.
Or General Motors, their subsidiaries, were supplying the German army with tanks.
Yeah,
At that level, there's no reason to stop doing business because there's a war going. In fact, it's an opportunity to make more money.
right.
And
Well, like
then when the conditions
maximi-
change, so they'll switch. They'll go
yeah,
to another strategy or something.
you're
So,
maximizing you're maximizing profit margins until a new business model can be formulated, and that's what I kind of see these sub rosa forces in both the East and the West doing, is that they continue to maximize profit margins. It continued with the fear and whatnot until a new business model could emerge. And I think that you saw that new business model emerging with, for instance, the funneling by the CIA of money into solidarity in Poland, through the IOR, through the Vatican Bank, and Banco Ambrosiano, which was basically a depository of old Catholic money. You
That's
know,
right. And Lucio Gelli just died, right?
yeah, he just passed on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Pope John Paul II went along with this whole idea because he was a Polish pope and he had lived under the Soviet fist in Poland, and had worked in the quarries and just worked these totally demeaning, enslaving jobs, and so he was passionately energized to the idea of bringing down communism in Europe. But at the same time, a lot of this money that's passing through Banco Ambrosiano, that's passing through IOR, the Vatican Bank, and all, and supposedly going to Solidarity, is actually getting shaved off and going into the pockets of KGB operatives, of party apparatchiks over in the Soviet Union who are anticipating the end. They see the petrification of their economic system, and they see that collapse is imminent. So they're receiving this money from the CIA and other deep political forces in the West and all, to form corporatist structures that they'll be able to hide in and survive in the world that exists after the collapse.
This would be like
And
Luke Oil and Gazprom. And
yeah, well, yeah,
yeah.
and it's kind of like what we were talking about, earlier on in this conversation. Well, the money that's going to the ISI is going to, of
Mm-hmm.
course, go into a Soviet defeat in Afghanistan, but they're also shaving off money and putting it into, their nuclear program, which contributes to another plan of ours, namely proliferation, that will lead to higher nuclear anxiety, which will in turn lead to world government.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's basically, you see the same kind of modus operandi, if you will, at work there and everything. So, I hope that kind of answers your question. It's just not something that you can answer that easy, because there were forces on both sides, in both the East and the West, that passionately believed in what they were in what they were fighting for, and believed honestly that it would either lead to an American or Soviet victory,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't see the merger as being the end game, as deep political force, as the forces on the sub rosa level in both the East and the West did. And both of those forces, again, periodically engaged in symbiosis. They either decided, hey, let's keep this game going, let's keep this going. Hawks in both the United States and in the Soviet Union worked to keep peace from breaking out. As a matter of fact, it reminds me of what Jones said in his interview with you. The history of the Cold War is the history of peace, the threat of peace, and people preventing that peace from breaking out. So we had these two sub rosa forces
Well, I mean
working.
I mean, if you look at things like the NSC 68, which is sort of military Keynesian economic planning, and you have the report from Iron Mountain, which is supposedly a satire, but it really isn't. They fear peace breaking out. How do you organize society? And that's I think what we're dealing with here.
Yeah. And we had four hawks, both here and hawks over there, that didn't want peace to break out, or they didn't want it to break out too soon.
Yeah.
And they decided to keep it going, and then they also decided when it was an acceptable time to end it all.
Mm.
And also, and again, if people want to understand my answer or see my perspective on this again, please, by all means, go and rent out the spy the From Russia with Love, the Bond movie and everything, because it really does illustrate the principle, the concept that I'm trying to to express, to articulate here.
Yeah, and the Bond series, the books, particularly the books, are a great revelation into the true nature of the intelligence world, and also how the world is really run. So,
Absolutely,
so,
absolutely.
and listen, listen, I want to thank you for coming on the show tonight, spending so much time and going through this article. It's a very long article, but it's a very informative article, and it's a perspective on something on like you said, sort of the sub-rosa operations that really determine our politics and how the world really tells us how the world really works. It's
Yeah,
nothing how it's retailed to us in the mainstream media.
well, I mean, like it was very revelatory when we did it because I mean we were grade school children when the day after came out on television, and you know at that time it scared the living daylights out of us, and over time as you grew older, you felt this. You had this eerie sense, at least we had this eerie sense that we had somehow been a rat in a maze. We had been a part of something and didn't even know it. We had been the subjects of some kind of social engineering scheme and didn't even know it. And as we did the research for this article, we finally started to see what the nature of that experiment was.
And I'd articulate it even in far more cruder terms. I felt as though I had been, well, mentally and emotionally raped. I mean,
well, that's the 20th century.
Yeah, essentially.
Pretty much, the 20th century is the biggest roofie ever ever created. You know, the elite roofie, if you will.
Yeah, the elite Bill Cosby,
Well,
assuming he's guilty.
Yeah. So, yeah, from the housing to the music to the entertainment, it's all, it's all connected. It's amazing how when you do research into these things, how none of these things are as innocent as you once thought they were. So,
No, not at all.
But you mentioned this article is going to be folded into a book. What's the book?
The book is called the working title for it is "Invoking the Beyond." We begun work on the book in
2010.
2010, and we have no real deadline to offer people in terms of its completion. Just because our work schedules are so demanding and our family schedules are so demanding. We will eventually finish it. We are now how many pages?
397 some
pages.
Yeah,
we're nearly 400 pages into it. We should be hopefully completing it. We're hoping by sometime mid or late 2016. But the title, Invoking the Beyond, it's basically dealing with the concept of the beyond, which is, for all practical purposes, this narrative construct that is introduced to the world of politics. If we can think of the world of politics as being analogous to a narrative, then this is yet another literary device, the beyond. And it's so named because it is beyond humanity. It basically is overwhelming epistemologically and ontologically. Nothing that our categories of knowledge can encapsulate it. Nothing of our understanding of the very essence of being can encapsulate it.
And that's another reason why it's so hard. It's been so long, and it's taking so long to get it done. The book done, Tim, is because there's so many different incarnations of the beyond. There's the manifestations from invaders to space, from space to superweapon, terrorism, you name it.
Yeah, but with the presentation of the beyond, you have the rationale for the introduction of Deus Ex Machina, which always tends to benefit an elite few, and it engenders fear, which in turn engenders compliance. And the very concept of the beyond finds its origins with Kantian metaphysics, the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, and how Immanuel Kant imposed this disjunction between the actual world as it's experienced by humanity and our epistemic faculties, basically severing humanity away from knowledge of the world as it is, and basically bifurcating it into the categories of the phenomenal and the noumenal, leaving us completely and totally stranded in a wasteland of knowledge concerning only the phenomenal, which gives rise to scientism, which gives rise the technocratic paradigm, and a whole host of other horrible, horrible ideas, which is what we see propelling the 20th and the 21st century.
Things have speeded up. Things seem to have sped up in the past decade.
Oh, yeah, we've seen an acceleration. That is for sure.
So, well, listen, Paul and Philip, want to thank you for coming on the show, discussing this article. It was a great article. You got a few others I want to discuss with you. Maybe in the near future we'll get a chance to talk again.
Absolutely.
It's always a great talk. It's always very thought-provoking and deep, and a lot to digest here.
Yeah, I try to cram a lot of information into it's I guess it's comparable to trying to stuff a pregnant elephant into a telephone booth, but I love to try to go information heavy in any interview that we give.
Yeah, because people can listen to it over and over again. And like I said, I strongly recommend that people go to conspiracyarchive.com and read your articles, and also buy your books. Of course, the one is The Hidden Hand of Terrorism.
The Hidden Face of Terrorism.
Hidden Face of Terrorism. That's right.
Yeah, that was the first book. That was actually authored by Paul, and I edited it. Then the second book, which an expanded, revised edition of that book was released in 2006, and that's the edition that, if anybody should wish to purchase a copy, that's the edition I urge them to purchase. Is the Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, an examination of epistemic autocracy from the 19th to the 21st century.
Okay, great. Listen, want to thank you. I already did thank you, so just wish you all a good night.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.